Welcome to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered with Perry Clark. This program looks at mental health from unique perspectives and shows you how to manage your life by finding the knots that help you and stay away from the ones that could be a disadvantage. Now, here is your host, Perry Clark.
Hello all, welcome back to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. I'm Perry Clark, licensed marriage and family therapist, here just to remind you, as we always do, that this podcast is for education and entertainment purposes only. It does not constitute working with a licensed mental health professional, and I do strongly suggest you find one in your area. And if we're not in your immediate area, do keep in mind that we can do this virtually as long as we're licensed in your state. So today's podcast was actually suggested to me by one of our other podcasts, Regina Ferden, who you're going to hear in October. And if you're listening to this, you probably have already heard the episode. But they recommended this individual who, as it turns out, I had already also bought one of their books and managed to start reading on that. And they also came out with a science fiction book too. So I had to get my hands on that one as well. So today we're going to be talking with David Archer. So David Archer let me pull that information right there again. He is a Master's of Social Work and an MFT and is an anti-racist therapist from Montreal, Canada, in the unsucceeded lands of Jojage. He provides mental health services and regularly conducts workshop presentations. He has delivered plenary and keynote speeches and authored books on race, identity, and mental health. Informed by mindfulness, memory reconsolidation, and critical race theory, Archer uses EMDR therapy and is the developer of the rhythm and processing framework. He specializes in treating complex PTSD and racial trauma and is dedicated to the increasing number of Black therapists and therapists from all backgrounds. Archer is an ally of LGBTQ, Black, Indigenous, and oppressed communities worldwide. So, David, welcome to Untying Knots.
Thank you. And thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Well, as am I. So how did you get started in all of this?
I think, there's so many answers that I can give there. First is what I can say is that sometimes people are like, well, you're in Montreal, Canada. Why is it that you're the author of Anti-Racist Psychotherapy? Many people can't really locate where Montreal is on a map, or they just think that Canada is just full of snow all the time and that there's only igloos and I guess snowmen. But no, apparently we do have humans. We do have people who live, who breathe, and I am one of them. And so,
well, and to show an example of the geography lessons failing.
Yes, well, I mean, we can also discuss about how the educational system needs some improvement, generally speaking. But I emerge out of a context where when I was younger in Quebec, the province was trying to separate from the rest of the country. So it's trying to separate from Canada. And there was a lot of an emphasis on whether a person was English or whether they were French. And I'm glad that even though you attempted to pronounce it, I think it's important for us to be able to know that the name of the place that I'm from was called Jojage by the original Haudenosaunee people, the indigenous people of this land. And at that time when there was discussions about language, there was also discussions relating to something called the Oka crisis, where the provincial and also federal government to some degree were in conflict with the indigenous people of this land, trying to take more land than they should have been able to take, which is what led to almost a standoff. And in some cases, there were confrontations. So I was raised in an environment where I was aware of my language as being separate or different from the majority. I was aware of me being non-Indigenous. I was also being aware of my Blackness, and navigating all of these things from a young age. It made it so that I needed to be just knowledgeable about what race and what identity was. And I think that those initial experiences set the framework or set in motion the possibility of me being anti-racist from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And as I was trained, and as you're an MFT as well, it's like I had a bachelor's in psychology. And in psychology, I felt as if there was little to no mention of race. And when they would talk about race, it was usually in comparison to white people or in a deficient way. And I usually talk about how I took my sensation and perception class, and they're talking about the retina, they're talking about the brain and all of this thing. And then they're like, by the way, Black people have worse vision than white people. And I was like, oh no, the only reference that I'll see anytime they mention Black is always negative. Or when I was in my high school, the readings that they would give us, they would give us readings from like the early 20th century. And for some reason, every author wanted to just drop the N-bomb. And I was like, why is it that we're needing to bring in race in this manner that's either making a person deficient or that it's attacking them? And so I endeavored to try to find out. I did my master's in social work, my master's in marriage and family therapy. And I started to see that there was not only the presence of systemic racism, which is what my social work master's gave me that language to understand, but it was my MFT that gave me the understanding of functions for all forms of communication. And after what happened with George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and the continued attacks that are on Black people, we know that there was this recent one in Jacksonville. We know even last year there was a high-profile one in Buffalo, New York. It's just, I really wanted to understand, now that I understood there was a function for this, how is it that I can help my people? How is it that we can all together come together to eliminate this problem of racism? And how can we become better and more effective psychotherapists, regardless of your race, background, or identity? Even this morning, I had a client call me, and they were referred to me because they had a white therapist, and the white therapist said that they felt that the client needed to speak to a person of color because the white therapist felt as if they were ill-equipped to help this person. It makes me think, how many times does it happen that a referral is being made or that we are not meeting the needs of our clients because we are ill-equipped to help people with this basic idea? And as you said, you've read the book, and I'm really grateful. I'm glad that you're reading Anti-Racist Psychotherapy. But when I talk about anti-racism, I speak to white audiences, I speak to Black audiences. Black audiences, I think, are more likely to understand race from their perspective because it's less unconscious. But I think one of the problems is that with many white people is that they forgot that they have a race. I mean, whiteness is so, I want to say it's ubiquitous. I feel that you see it everywhere. And so white people believe then that their race is the default. So because many white therapists have not necessarily had to contend with the idea of what whiteness means for them, sometimes they feel as if it's difficult for them to be able to speak about what the race of the client means for the client as well. And so my work, as you mentioned, it is to increase the amount of Black therapists that are out there, because they're, in terms of being a Black approved EMDR consultant, I'm the only male one that I know in my country, and that needs to change. But I know that we can't do it by ourselves. I know that the problem of racism was not created by Black people. It's a problem that exists within the concept of whiteness. So that's why we need white, Black, Asian, Indigenous. We need all therapists to commit to being anti-racist so that we can also solve the problems that are affecting the global majority of individuals in the world.
And even to that end, what you're saying about the aspect of referrals, how many times do we not have people making referrals because they haven't even recognized that too? And
Exactly.
at which point the client's also still getting harm or not getting the degree of work that they actually need to be able to move forward.
Yeah. And let me say also, as speaking from to MFT across the border and all this, is that I recently had a couple that they met with me in the area, in the BC area, BC era. So before COVID. Okay. So they met me in real life. Now I just work virtually. They met with me and they stopped meeting with me because of the pandemic, all of these other things. And then eventually they met with a couple therapists. And this is in the city. And they stopped meeting with that therapist. Well, just another aspect is that they were a multicultural couple and multilingual couple. So one of the members of the relationship was a Spanish speaker. So they stopped meeting with that therapist because even though the therapist could speak the same language as one of the members of the couple, that therapist could not speak about racial elements and could not speak about culture. So to some degree, they're more willing to meet with me, even though I don't share the same mother tongue as one of the partners. So what does that mean? It means that I feel that there's a deeper level of understanding that can come about if we are able to speak about the person's full experience, regardless of the words that we are using. So I'm also, again, this is still answering your first question, just letting you know I give long answers. Okay. Yeah. So I'm also not a talk therapist. I don't identify as being a specific talk therapist. I believe that some of the problems that people have are not solved or are difficult to solve by just speaking to the parts of our brain that are going to formulate language. I think that as a person who specializes in treating complex post-traumatic stress disorder, as well as complex racial trauma, we need to involve the limbic system. We need to involve the creative aspects of the person's mind. And so because the therapy is not just about acting on a person, it's also about who I am as a therapist, I endeavor to also teach these skills to other therapists as well. So to awaken these creative potentials within our clients by awakening them within the therapist and ultimately changing, getting to a new paradigm of how psychotherapy can be.
Very true. Well, yeah, because and as I often say with clients, our first language is not the spoken word. Our first language is emotion.
You got it.
And getting into that, what's going on with that emotion, because we make, as we've learned in our studies, is that we make meaning after we've gotten the emotion.
There we go.
What's the emotion that's going on here first and foremost? Thought I was just remembering something from 2016 where someone was saying, it's like, it isn't logical what they're doing. And I said, okay, yeah, it's not logical. And when it stops being logical, now you got to start looking at it emotionally.
That's it.
And then it actually starts making more sense. What's the emotion that is driving this experience?
100%. I feel that what makes us get stuck and what makes it so that not just the client, sometimes the therapist as well, is when we try to think in terms of logic, as if logic is an objective thing, but it's not. In fact, I tell my clients, you may think it's logical, but it's psychological. So I feel that there's always an explanation when we dive deep enough into understanding what's going on. And I think that some of the Western concepts or the Western ideas that we learn in our field, that they can kind of limit us, and it kind of prevents us from being able to dive into the full depth of who people are. For example, the Western concept of time is a little different from the Afrocentric perspective of time. And since you said that you were up to chapter 6 in my book, I hope this isn't a spoiler, but what happens is that the Afrocentric perspective of time is that time can be cyclical.
Mm-hmm.
And the way how I see it when we are working with relational systems is that if you look at the individual in isolation, you're missing a lot of the solution to the issue. When we start to use the genogram, we start to see that their parents sometimes have passed down legacies to them. When we start to use the genogram and we see the grandparents, we can see that even the grandparents, to some degree, may have passed down certain responsibilities relating to, or not responsibilities, but legacies relating to gender roles, relating to what it means to be a man, what it means to be a good woman or a good person. And the client, many times, if it is unconscious to them or even pre-conscious, and the therapist is not willing or even unable due to skill, due to their own countertransference, if they're unable to open up the possibility of us looking towards the past, then we are unable to make the best types of changes in the present.
Well, yeah,
So,
when those ghosts of the past are still whispering in your ear.
You got it. You got it. And so that's why I feel that we need to at least know about trauma. We need to at least know about injuries that have happened in the past if we're going to help people in the present, so that we can be the Ghostbusters that we need to be. Or even if it's not Ghostbusters, I think it's really that we can, to some degree, to lay some of those ancestors to rest as well, so that we are not reproducing the suffering that has happened to them, and we can help them to heal and then help us to heal as well.
Which is part of the secular nature, but equally even going into the Afrocentric idea, depending on what portion of Afro we're talking about, the idea of the reincarnated family member standpoint, and how that is creating an environment that is ideally better for the person to come back in and heal and resolve that trauma in this next iteration of the incarnation.
That's beautiful.
But one of the things I know, and I've noticed it in your work, and I've noticed it in a number of other ones, is also the aspect of the issue of people, or the relationship with accountability, or more importantly, the lack of accountability or the fear of accountability, and how much accountability has been used much more punitively as opposed to as a form of love, which then also brings up, how do you normalize the idea that accountability is actually a practice of love too?
And what question do you have specifically for me? Would you like for me to reflect?
I wouldn't so much say it's a specific question, but it's the one that I've noticed that it's between the lines in so many of the different materials I've read. And I think it was chapter 5, you were very much talking about the aspect of people's responses to accountability.
Okay. So I'm going to need to check in my book. I haven't read that book in a while. Chapter 5, which one is that?
I think it's chapter 5.
I've since because let me just say that's my first book. My second book and third book. First book is Anti-Racist Psychotherapy. Second one is Black Meditation. The third one is Racial Trauma Recovery. And the fourth one is my science fiction novel, which is Black. Oh, you got the whole collection. Yeah, you got the whole library, Perry. Mr. Clark.
I bought all 4.
Mr. Clark. Okay, I appreciate your support. So yeah,
exactly.
So because I've written so much, I don't know what chapter that is. But what I can say is that if we speak about white supremacy, which I believe is maybe the 4th or 5th for that book, I've recently started to say, instead of white supremacy, I'll say white insecurity, because there's something about the power structure that if you need to have a power structure that needs to be supreme at all times, then it's insecure. It means it doesn't feel safe. It means that it needs to enact violence in order to maintain itself. Otherwise, something bad will happen. And sometimes when we see the profiles of these, the people that have committed violence due to racial animus or hatred towards Black people, they don't always seem confident. I mean, I can't judge a person from their physical, from like their mugshot or anything like that. I mean, there's a lot of talk of mugshots because I think your ex-president recently. Anyways,
Yeah, well,
I
we
guess
don't
I'll
need to
save
go
it
on that, but even to that point, what during the stuff in Minnesota, the teenager who got himself a gun and managed and sadly killed two people.
Yeah,
his response was there was just that response, even though he wasn't saying it, it was between the lines, and he expected to be still considered a hero for what he did. And when he didn't get the heroic response, and even the response to the fact that who he killed weren't black people but were white people, it totally shattered that sense of whatever security he was having.
mm-hmm. And so it's because I feel it's a little bit of a game that unfortunately we're all wrapped up in, this idea of race. And even though I've written extensively on race, race is fictional. So we've actually never seen white people before. I think if a person's skin complexion is white, like the bowl on my desk or something, I think they have a medical issue. I think if you're white and if you're specifically black, like these things don't actually exist. It's just that we create them. And I think that when you're talking about this individual, it's that they bought into the idea of whiteness, that they bought into the idea that white is supposed to be supreme, and to some degree that white cannot be held accountable for its actions. The only people who do bad things are black, or the only people, like in the book I do talk about the binary complex trauma cycle. It's not listed as that in that book. It's listed as that in Black Meditation, but it's the idea that on one side you're going to get white insecurity / supremacy. On the other side, you will get black suffering. And what oftentimes will happen is that whiteness will dissociate itself from its trauma or from its suffering or from accountability to some degree. And through a process that's called soul murder, so intense violence, oftentimes what narcissistic abusers will do towards their victims to damage the soul and the spirit of the individual, they can project the negative traits of themselves into another body so that they don't have to deal with it within themselves. And that is the reason why black people oftentimes become the face of slavery or the face of suffering. We don't always think about who were the white enslavers, the people who did the crime. We will focus on the victim and oftentimes present the suffering in terms of that it's black people that are bad or black people that are worth or not worth, but black people who are worthless despite the fact they generated the worth of the United States and Canada and all of these things. And so the problem of that cycle is when the black person believes that they are black or they are somebody's black instead of believing that they are their own, because then that validates the idea of white supremacy. If you believe that you're bad because you're black, then the white person then has delegitimized you, and then it becomes easier to cause further harm to you. The reason, jumping back, the reason why I'm saying that these are fake concepts is because whiteness and blackness in this example can also be generalized towards male dominance and female submission. Also be generalized towards, or you can also put it towards straight violence, like the heteropatriarchy towards gay individuals, LGBTQ, trans individuals, etc. So these,
and I would actually also add to that too, neurodiverse to neurotypical, quote unquote, neurotypical.
Exactly. Which is almost, and these are things that I'm still learning. Like I've written these books, but I'm still learning about all the ways how ableism is part of our fields and part of our education system, etc. But it's key just to know that whiteness changes depending on the country you're in. Blackness changes depending on where you're at. Me being a man, if I go to certain countries, the idea of a real man is a guy who has a pickup truck or something, or like a guy with, I mean, I have a goatee. I was going to say a large beard, but I hope you get the idea. Is that?
Oh yeah. Or in some cases, the idea that you have how many children?
Exactly. Only a real man, or a real woman in some cases too. Only a real woman is going to have children. And so that's why we say it's socially constructed, because it's nonsense. We say it's socially constructed because depending on your context, it changes. But if we give it value, if we keep repeating the same belief about it, it becomes real. And if everyone agrees on the belief, then it's a form of collective mental illness that's based on trauma, which is the whole basis of anti-racist psychotherapy. And it's that if there are people who are traumatized based on race and based on these social construction issues, we can use EMDR therapy to help them. But what I'm trying to do is to help enough people so that we can start to develop the same technology so that we eliminate the sickness that exists in our society in a similar vein.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's also that interesting flip of the idea that instead of saying for so long saying that we are the ones who are pathologically ill, what does it mean when it gets flipped over to the white supremacy, or some would say the global minority aspect of, no, you're actually the ill ones?
Yeah, well, and even and I want to make sure that people understand as well is that it's not even who, it's more what. Because many of the white people who think they're white are not white.
Oh yeah.
Okay, is that there's a psychological, I forget who termed it, so I won't misquote it. I don't know if it's Carter G. Woodson or W.B. Du Bois, but it was that there's a psychological wage and a psychological benefit that poor white people get by identifying as being white. But the rich white people do not care about the lives of poor white people, but they can use them as a shield to fight for their interest.
Yeah,
and
well,
so,
it's that classic saying, it's better to be poor white trash than black. And that's black exactly. At every social economic level.
Yes. And so I think that one day, I believe that the day will come when these poor white people, which I think, people like Fred Hampton were trying to get white people to understand, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, all of them were trying to get all people to understand that we all outnumber the racists. And the racists are the same people who, to some degree, believe that it's worthwhile to drill into the earth to sacrifice the future as well. Because it's even worse than a racist. It's a speciesist. It's a person who doesn't like humans and doesn't like the continued future, which is, we're going to be talking about my next book, but that's kind of what.
Yeah. Well, I think that's probably the place where we can make the segues for taking a break. But I could also say that there are certain ways that there's, I'm going to say, religious programming in that too.
Look,
that as opposed to spiritual programming, I think it's more religious programming that fits into that. But let's save that for the next section. And
that's what I was going to say. We could have 1,000 episodes right now, man. Like, there's so much.
So much to explore in that, and that's also one of the beauties of science fiction. So most of what we've been talking about in this first half is anti-racist psychotherapy.
Yes.
So we're going to take a pause there, and we're going to come back for the second half, where we're going to go talk about the science fiction and fantasy area of this next, or Afrofuturism next. Either way, we're coming back in this next section. So stay tuned, folks. We'll be back shortly.
Fantastic.
So, I'm Perry Clark, licensed marriage and family therapist, here with David Archer, master social worker and licensed marriage and family therapist as well. So stay tuned, folks. We'll be back in a second.
Want to see what Voice America is up to behind the scenes? Follow us on TikTok at Voice America Talk Radio.
This is the home of the top life coaches, entrepreneurs, and success drivers. The Voice America Empowerment Channel.
Our lives and the world around us can get messy and frustrating. Untangle and Grow Counseling's focus is to untangle that mess and make sense of it so you have a good foundation to build and grow from. Visit us on the web at untangleandgrowcounseling.com. Perry Clark offers individual psychotherapy, couples and family therapy, and adolescence therapy from a variety of coping materials and resources. Visit untangleandgrowcounseling.com for more information.
Where can you listen to some of the world's top life coaches ready to dish out success tips and entrepreneurial guidance? The Voice America Empowerment Channel will do just that. Whether it's personal growth, building a better business, or inspirational life stories, make it a daily habit to tune into our programs. From weight loss and personal branding to law of attraction and increased happiness, you'll find it every day at voiceamericaempowerment.com. The Voice America Empowerment Channel. It's your world. Motivate, change, succeed.
You are listening to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. If you have a question or comment about our podcast, send an email to pclark@untyingknotspodcast.com. That's pclark@untyingknotspodcast.com. And now, back to the program.
Hello all, welcome back to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. I'm Perry Clark, licensed marriage and family therapist, here with David Archer, master social work and marriage and family therapist, and also author.
Yes.
Since we were talking about in the first half, his first book of his 4, which was Anti-Racist Psychotherapy, and you have the other 2 books, which are Racial Trauma Recovery with Healing Our Past Using Rhythm and Processing. And then also Black Meditations, 10 Practices for Self-Care, Mindfulness, and Self-Determination. And then you have your 4th book, which kind of breaks with these first 3, which is called Black Mountain, Fight for the Future. And this one falls more in the science fiction, fantasy, Afrofuturism category.
Yes.
And just to read the back blurb here, Black Mountain, Fight for the Future. In a world on the brink of destruction, threatened by artificial intelligence, climate change, and corporate greed, only one group of fighters can rise up and lead the revolution. Go forth, Black Mountain, fight for the future. Black Mountain is an Afrofuturism, anime-inspired and science fiction novel that transports readers into a future where a powerful ruler, Bateas, and I should also, I am dyslexic, so phoneme pronunciation, I struggle with that.
But it's okay. Nobody knows how to pronounce that. That's fine.
Bateas, threatens the very fabric of existence. Join Firearm, Black Blob, as they become the newest recruits to a group of freedom fighters led by
Zodakon and
Anti-Racsism. Together, they face life or death struggles, heal from their trauma, and defeat the global oppressor by harnessing the elemental forces of the planet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this is the 4th, and actually, I feel I'm still answering your first question, so I'm going to go back to answering your first question, because you asked me, how did I get here?
Mm-hmm.
Before being a psychotherapist, I was a software engineer. And as a software engineer, I was very interested in how do we solve complex problems using lines of code. And I was always interested back then too in video games. And I was interested in how I just preferred, even when I was in high school, there'd be those books where there'd be like choose your own adventure types of books. Mm-hmm. And I liked the idea that you read a book and it's like there's options. It's like you could take the left turn or take the right turn, and you take the left turn and then it's like the end because you like fell off a cliff or something. And then I'd always go back and be like, no, okay, I'm gonna take the right turn. And I was always interested in how choose your own adventure books were very different from the standard book in that it didn't follow a linear progression. You didn't start from the beginning of the book and then move your way to the end. So I was always interested in alternative ways of using media and learning from it. And also that's what made me very interested in video games as well, is that I like the idea that I was watching a movie and controlling the character, and my actions could determine what it is that takes place. And I didn't even tell you about my hip hop. I'm still an MC. I'm still an artist, and I think I was an artist before all of these things. And that's the reason why I like that choose your own adventure style of, the way how we're going to read this book is a little different. So the way how I did computer programming is a little different. And the way how I am a psychotherapist is also a little different as well. I wanted to quickly mention that for racial trauma recovery, the reason why I wrote that book is because even though I am a person who does brain spotting, EMDR therapy, I've used emotional freedom technique, again, relational systems, all of this, I felt that in the models I was using, sometimes after you would be trained, you would need an extra training in order to be able to work with Black people or people of color, or even complex PTSD presentations. That the standard training, sometimes it was good because you need the standard training in order to do these things, but then you need an extra training in order to do it with the people that are suffering the most. So that's the reason why I developed rhythm and processing, so that at the outset, it's talking about race. At the outset, it's talking about complex PTSD, and it tunes into the unlimited creativity that's in every single one of our clients. So as I was writing it and as I was developing it, if I can just quickly just say, when people are traumatized, oftentimes it implicates the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the HPA axis, which is our stress response system, and which involves the release of cortisol. When people are stressed beyond what they can handle, and when the stress happens at key developmental periods, then they will often become traumatized in a way that's different from other forms of mental health stresses. And when people pass those thresholds continually, then they start to some degree to make an association between these events and their present situation, to the way that it changes their way how they see themselves. So in a way, the way how they see themselves, the way how they visualize, is different from the person who's non-traumatized. So that's why rhythm and processing takes that into account, and it uses the adaptive nature of our ability to visualize or to see things that make us feel good, so that we can provide overturning information and make it so that when the brain is expecting to feel suffering, instead it's going to feel completely awesome. When the mind is expecting that it's going to access something that is too scary, instead it can feel very confident. And so in the sessions, I'm happy to say, true to my hip hop roots, even last week, I was helping someone to heal from long-standing trauma by using gospel music. It's regular, like it's a regular occurrence that people will use hip hop music or even anime or even visual. I've even had people watch videos on YouTube of people playing video games that they love, to be able to provide that disconfirming evidence and that disconfirming knowledge. And that's what forms the basis of memory reconsolidation. When we are able to provide these disconfirming events, when we do things that are different from what the brain expects, we get a different response, and we have an opportunity to update the way how the memory has been stored. So when a person is asking me, why are you writing a science fiction novel? It's because we got to do this thing different. If we want to make it so that more people are interested in psychotherapy, we can't only be at the conferences. We have to be with the people. That's why I appreciate and love to do these types of podcasts, because I feel that if I'm only to just publish in journals, I won't be able to reach the people who eventually might want to be therapists. And in a similar vein with Black Mountain, is that it's a science fiction novel that has some appeal for young adults, that has some appeal for people who like anime, has some appeal for people who like just like coming of age novels. But it's also, strangely enough, it follows the canon of the 3 previous books. So it incorporates the ideas of anti-racist psychotherapy. Black meditation is explicitly named, and the rhythm and processing technique is done, but it's done in a futuristic spaceship. So it's done in a different way, but the principles are still there. And it was a joy for me to write this because I felt like I was writing a book that would make the 16-year-old version of myself happy. The teenager self part of myself that wanted to understand what race was about, but wanted to also be able to just be a kid and just have fun, appreciate things. And so that's why whenever I talk about this book, I smile. I feel good because I feel it's designed to be different, and it falls into that mission of increasing interest in our field and making people think about mental health different.
Well, that also brings back to one of the points we talked about earlier about the aspect of, and as I've often said, is nothing happens in isolation.
Yes.
Everything is still in connection to something else. And the healing it's going to need to be in connection to other things. Now, that does not mean that containment isn't also necessary, but that process is definitely needed there. And I know one of the things when I spoke with Tanana Reeve-Dew was the aspect of, even with my joy of Afrofuturism, I didn't always feel like they were talking about Afrofuturism in the relationship with mental health. Now that I consider it, is like, oh, was I still looking for it to have the obvious sign that this was mental health, as opposed to it was always in there and in amongst, in relationship to everything else. So a book that actually, then going into, when I read your book, going in knowing that it's there, it's probably going to have a very different experience for me compared to if I was reading any of the others. And it's like, where's the mental health? Oh, wait a minute. It's there. Yes. I'm just looking for I'm looking too much for this sign when I need to be looking for something else.
Yes. So I do hope that that you appreciate in this book is that it's like, I feel, and I have to be careful because this is a fiction book, so I don't want to give spoilers, I said this to
respect spoilers.
Yeah. But I said this to many people. I'm like, in my other books, I start off with racism and I end with racism. So you know what's going to happen in the book. I'm going to tell you about racism. But in this book, it's that I intentionally made it that it has nothing to do with humans, actually. So this is after Earth is destroyed. This is many, many years in the future. And I wanted to do that just so that I can make something that is so science fiction-y, but actually still relating to what we experience as humans. And although it's not like there is like trauma processing that's in there, it's not, there's no therapist in the book. And I did that intentionally as well, because I believe that we were talking about time being cyclical. And I think that before there was a specific therapist that a person would go to meet, they would probably be helped by the community. I forgot to say in my bio, but I'm also a father, and my son is 1 year old and a month now. And I noticed that his only way of communicating is by screaming when he needs help, or yelling, crying, and sometimes just picking him up is all that he needs. And I really think that that's not a therapist move. That's just a human move, or that's just like a way of relating to someone that's more vulnerable. That when people are stronger, it's natural for them to try to help and protect those who need it. And so that's why in the book, I didn't want to make it that anyone is seen as a therapist or anyone is seen as a client. And to some degree, just like in my own practice, sometimes when the context of the healing is that the client is bringing their strengths to gain their insights without the intervention of the therapist, it's not always clear who the therapist or who the client is. Because if the client is the one who's bringing the insight or the wisdom, what's happening in that situation? And I do that intentionally because as an anti-racist, in our therapy processes, the way how we're taught, it's like by default, there's this hierarchy of saying the therapist is the one with the knowledge and the client is coming to the knowledge so they can get themselves out of the situation. Because I know you're a systemic therapist, I know that you probably are working with the system, so they bring about their insights as well. But I'm very interested. Sometimes what will happen to me as a therapist, even though I'm working and helping a person to heal from their suffering, the client will say something that strikes me as so insightful that I feel as if I got something from the session. So in that case, was I the therapist? You know, like maybe they're the therapist too, and maybe I'm the client as well. And so that's why the book plays a lot in terms of the importance of community, the importance of people helping each other, but ultimately that if we cultivate our skills, when we cultivate our strengths, using the principles of Black meditation, using the processes that are in racial trauma recovery, using the drive and the force that's from anti-racist psychotherapy, then maybe we can change the world.
Nothing else exists in isolation.
Mm-hmm.
And that hierarchy is part of the parts that support the supremacy movement, that there has to be a hierarchy, or that hierarchy always has to be flowing downward as opposed to two ways.
Yeah. And again, that type of hierarchy, once again, I feel is insecurity. I feel that, it's to protect something, is to make it so that it's limited because there's a fear. And there, oftentimes this does happen with different professions as well, is that there's battles between who's allowed to practice, who's allowed to diagnose, who's allowed to use this form of assessment versus this one, or, there's who can go to this type of training instead of this type of training. There's always, these things are like in our field, they're very deep in there.
Or the difference between a therapist and a coach.
Yeah, exactly. And so, because I started off as an artist, I like to kind of, I was never really good at, you were talking about dyslexia. For me, I was never really good at coloring in the lines. Okay, so I've never been really good at being able to stay in one way of being. And I think that that doesn't mean that we're broken. I think that it means that we're perfectly fine the way how we are, like that.
No, it means we process information differently and we'll have a different perspective. Even going back to your first book, which was talking about the differences in perspective of viewing a situation, who might not be seeing something that someone else is. And look out, there's a train coming. No, there's not a train coming. Yes, there's a train coming.
You're making me think, when I was in computer science, I was just speaking to one of my friends about this last week, is that one of my teachers at the time, he knew that I was just thinking differently about computers and stuff. So he gave me this book. It was about epistemology. And back then, I didn't even know how to spell it. I didn't even understand what, I was like a teenager. I was like, why is it that he's giving me this? But I was so fascinated with the idea that if it's like the way how we acquire knowledge can be different and it can be debatable. And so one person might see that there's a train that's coming, and maybe that's due to their own programming. And, for another person, it can be, I don't know, for another person, it could be an opportunity. For another person, it can be that the train is coming because we need to go on the train to go to our destination. Another person could say the train is coming, so it's scary because of their trauma response. And I've just been fascinated in that. And I think that it's that flexibility that allows people to heal and to recover. When a person is healed or feels a bit better about themselves, and then they think about their traumatic memory, they change the memory, because now they're not thinking about the memory from a place of suffering. So if you're feeling completely awesome and you think about it, something's different now. And that's kind of what underlies change. And so even in the book, in Black Mountain, I wanted to just make sure that it was like nothing I've ever read, by integrating things that I've written, and also by integrating like my influences that I have as well. And I made one of the characters speak Jamaican patois, because I didn't mention that. I'm also, I told you, I'm still answering your first question of who I am.
Well,
So yeah,
there's that secular nature of it.
yes.
The first question is still the question that is current even at the end.
Yes. So even in this book and developing it, I knew I wanted to make different voices for each character. And one of my favorite characters in it is Nanny Maroon. That's her name. And she speaks with Jamaican patois, because again, humans have been destroyed for a long time, but they still have access to literature that has been like reconstructed due to radio waves that have been shot out and sound waves that have been shot out from humans and other civilizations before their civilizations were completely destroyed. So she still was able to learn the patois. And what's fun for me is that I had to ask my mother, because I'm not a fluent patois, Jamaican patois speaker, but my mother is. So it's like I had an Excel spreadsheet with my mom, and I'm like, Mom, how do I say this in actual Jamaican? And she's like, no, man, you're not saying it properly. You got to say it like this. No, don't use this. This is the way how we do it. So it's a lot of fun to try to make it so that my mother's voice would continue in this book. And this is a book, I don't know if my mother's even interested in science fiction, but she felt it was a lot of fun to try to get a character in a book to cuss at people in Jamaican patois. So
well, it makes
it
makes me think of Nilo Hopkins' book, Midnight Robber, and the mention of Granny Nanny, which was the computer system in that book, and that had reached the point where, I mean, there's some. We'll talk about that afterwards. But there's the computer system had gotten to the point where it's no longer speaking; it was actually just creating musical tones, which can contain the programming.
Mm-hmm. So that's deep, man. That is deep. And, like, I would definitely have to read that book. Because I have so many questions about that. But I think that to some degree, and I don't know if this is what the author was aiming for, but I feel in some ways even music can be more effective at communication than words. Because the music, you're going to hear it and feel it. And like words,
and it doesn't. Well, words don't fall prey to the aspect of their definitions changing. And I know that's the big one I talk about with couples is what are you defining your word, the things you're discussing by the correctly, because otherwise you're talking about two different things and not realizing it, even if you're using the same word.
100%. And this is, although it does cause conflict in our couples, it also is an opportunity to change things as well, because it comes back to what I was saying as well, is what happens if we change the definition of Black? What happens if we are no longer the oppressed Black or someone else's Black, or as James Baldwin was, Not My Negro is the name of
right
that's over there. What if you're your own Negro? What if you're your own Black person? That's what Black meditation is about as well, is what if we can change the way how we see ourselves, and if we can love ourselves because of who we are. And it's not that what happens if the trauma still happened to them, but they no longer identify with the trauma anymore, or they identify with it differently.
Which is post-traumatic growth.
You got
which is shifting accountability from punitive to love.
100%. And with all of these books that we're talking about, with all of the work that you're talking about with your clients, I don't think we can do this type of thing without love. I think that love is what underlies all of it. It's a love for humanity and a love for the infinite possibilities that are out there. And I've tried to, like, recently, I started to think, how do I just create more gratitude in the world? Like, how do I just create more experiences of clients feeling grateful, me feeling grateful, and my son feeling grateful? And since I've been doing that, it's just brought up a lot more smiles in my day-to-day.
Something says, I think you have your fifth book in that.
Well, my fifth book, to tell you the truth, I'm thinking about interracial couple counseling and relational systems.
That's a very good one, a very big one. That's a big one for growth. I mean, my partner is white as well, so it's and there are definitely moments about what's going on between us, and when we're out in social, or even when, as an LGBT man, I'm still getting occasionally get hit on by other people, and it's like, are you coming to me for the right reasons, or are you just satisfying the fetish? And it's like, gotta walk carefully with that.
Yes, because you see, we didn't even talk about the intersections of race and all. Look, as I said, there's 1,000 podcasts in this conversation. I guess we're gonna have a part 2 at some point. Of course. If you'd like, read a bit of the book and then let me know. We could come back, because it seems you are very well read and like an intellectual. So I'd like to hear your perspectives on these things. And if there's any other topics you'd like for me to speak about, you just let me know. It's a pleasure talking to you. Oh, I think we're definitely going to be doing that. And, I think that's probably a good place for us to wrap up. Yeah. So if folks want to get more of the books or work with you, where can they find that information? Yes. So again, my name is David Archer, and you can find this information on archertherapy.com, ARCHERTHERAPY.com. And also, if you don't mind buying books from billionaires who fly rocket ships and stuff, you can find my books on Amazon. And you can search for, again, the book is Anti-Racist Psychotherapy, Confronting Systemic Racism and Healing Racial Trauma, Black Meditation, 10 Practices, I should know this, 10 Practices for Self-Care, Compassion. No, that's a wrong title. 10 Practices for Self-Care, Mindfulness, and Self-Determination. And then Racial Trauma Recovery, Healing Our Past Using Rhythm and Processing. And then the 4th science fiction novel, Black Mountain Fight for the Future. You can get them on Amazon or go on my website. There's a list of Black bookstores that you can get them from. Support our Black bookstores. They make it possible to hear from Black authors like myself. And we just need to continue that, just that, I want to say that, that ritual, but also that tradition of each person teaching one another. So, and to anyone hearing this, thank you for taking the time to listen, and also to remember that you're beautiful because of who you are. So you're Black because you're beautiful because you're Black. And regardless of how you identify yourself, I hope you have a wonderful day. And I'm also going to throw in this aspect of that when this airs, it's probably going to be the end of November. So everyone's going to be starting to shop for their Christmas presents. Or if not, let's consider Black Meditations as your Kwanzaa gift. There we go. So just think about that, folks. That's it, man. So, David, thank you again for being here. And we're going to have a part 2. It's once I've had a chance to go through some of these other books. Fantastic. And until then, you take care. And for everyone out there, I hope you take care. And yeah, let's practice some accountability with love. There we go. Many blessings. Take care. Stay tuned, folks. We'll be back for more. And have a good one here on Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. I'm Perry Clark, licensed marriage and family therapist. And we've just been talking with David Archer, master social worker and MFT and author. Till then.
Thank you for tuning in for Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. Be sure to join your host, Perry Clark, for another episode on the podcast coming soon on the Voice America Empowerment Channel.